If Ohio State wins the national championship next year, they won't be the only team to ever buy a championship. To be honest, they would actually join a long list of teams that have paid for talent to step on campus. Yes, it's believed the cost of their big-time transfer portal acquisitions like Will Howard, Quinshon Judkins, and more has been estimated to cost around 10 to 13 million bucks. But even before NIL was made public, most of the top teams in college football paid for recruits under the table. Now, look, some people don't like to talk about it like it's taboo or something, and there are some programs that tried to stay somewhat clean. But if we are going to be honest with ourselves, we all know what was going on. Your team was doing it too. Not only were recruits getting paid to attend the school, but the guys on the current roster would get thrown some coin on a lot of teams. I mean, hell, my father, may he rest in peace, told me stories all the time about finding envelopes in his locker after the games where he played well at Auburn. I mean, the biggest change is the high value that guys are getting paid right now. I mean, back in the day, if a recruit got paid by multiple schools, he could rack up a pretty nice price tag, and once he chose a school on signing day, he would just keep all the money. Because what are they going to do? Tell on him? I mean, they were the ones that paid him. But we haven't seen guys going for a mill at this rate ever before. And Ohio State isn't the only school doing it. But Ryan Day and the crew in Columbus, they've got to do something. Because when you sign up to be the head man for the Buckeyes, you can't keep losing to Michigan, regardless of what else you accomplish outside of maybe winning a natty. So while it may seem desperate, it looks like it's working out. It's a smart play. If you can't beat them, then buy them. But if he doesn't get it done this year at home against a Michigan team that's lost more experience than Drew Barrymore in 51st dates, it could get real weird real quick. Bring in my co-host David Cohn, former Michigan quarterback. I'm sure he's got an interesting take on this. My brother, former Western Colorado wide receiver Blaine Crane. David, when you look at what Ohio State has done through the transfer portal, Caleb Downs, Quinshon Judkins, Will Howard, go down the list. The guys that return on defense. Like I said yesterday, it's going to be very hard for me not to pencil in Ohio State to at least make the national championship game. But do you think this is a new thing in college football, or it's just a new way to do it out in the public? Jimbo Fisher did say, we've been doing NIL for a long time. Y'all just started finding out about it.
First of all, I never got an envelope, so I can only assume that Michigan never played any players ever in the history of the program. So it's good to know that they're doing things the right way in Ann Arbor. But in Columbus right now, man, there just seems to be a real sense of urgency. Yeah. And I think a lot of it is motivated by Michigan coming off a national championship, 3 straight conference championships by the Wolverines, and that's great to see. That's great. I mean, we've watched it with Auburn and Alabama for over a decade, the back and forth, and Auburn winning the 2010 national championship sandwiched between Alabama winning 2 or 3. So I love to see it in terms of paying the players to get there. Look, I think that Ryan Day is just utilizing every mechanism that is allowed right now to be able to put together the best roster possible. They go on the road to Oregon this year. That's going to be a big game. You know, they're going to get the Wolverines at home with new coach Sharon Moore. That's going to be interesting to see just because of the intensity of the rivalry. You don't have to go undefeated anymore is another great thing. I mean, the Buckeyes are going to benefit greatly from not having these divisions. And one of those 2 schools, Oregon or Michigan, they may match up with again, not just in the conference championship, but in the college football playoff. So I think Ryan Day is doing all the right things. There's a sense of urgency. New offensive coordinator Bill O'Brien may leave to be the new head coach at Boston College. I know he has ties to Boston and he has a situation with his son there with the hospital. So expect that news to break one way or another in the next couple of days. But even if Bill O'Brien decides not to be the offensive coordinator there, I don't think it's a huge loss. Yeah, we already talked about how weird it was. The Buckeyes are going to go where Will Howard takes them. How dominant is he going to be? And then to me, if in terms of your question of will they win a national championship, how dominant is Georgia going to be?
Without a doubt.
Georgia's the other best roster in the country.
And I mean, we're to a 12-team playoff now, so you can take a couple hits with the schedule like Ohio State has, and you win late, you can get in there and then make a run. You know, right now I'm leaning toward picking them to win the Big Ten. But Blaine, when you look at Michigan, they're about to go from their strongest point to kind of a transitory period with what they're losing, not only from a personnel standpoint on the field, but on the sidelines as well with Jim Harbaugh, obviously going to the NFL. I know Sharon Moore has a lot of experience, but if Ohio State is going to flip this thing back, at least for a year, at least to give Ryan Day some breathing room in this rivalry game, you are not going to catch Michigan at a weaker point than you will next year. New quarterback, new leaders, Blake Corum's gone, new guys on the offensive line. I already talked about Jim Harbaugh. this is the time, and it seems like Ohio State is going all in to build a Frankenstein team, kind of like we're seeing with Ole Miss, right? We saw it with Texas State. Colorado tried to do it in year one. Just what are your thoughts on where Ohio State is going into this year with Ryan Day?
Well, we'll say this. If you're Ohio State and you're Ryan Day, and if you don't beat Michigan and don't make a run in the playoffs, I believe you will not be the head coach.
What if you lose to Michigan but make a run in the playoffs and lose?
I think you will be depending on how far the run is, will depend if Ryan Day will be the head coach. I think if you lose the game before the Natty or something like that, I do think you will come back. They need that. You spent $13 million in NIL, and I kind of go back to the A&M team with Jimbo Fisher, and I know that's different because it's recruiting. One thing I worry about when it comes to stuff like this is how many personalities can you put in a locker room before it becomes toxic, before it becomes dangerous. You go look at the Junkins kid at Ole Miss, phenomenal talent. Things weren't going well between him and Lane Kiffin and those teams and that staff at Ole Miss. So you can have the great players, and it kind of makes me think about the NBA teams, right? The Warriors, who drafted their talent, a cohesion of talent through the years that built together. You can buy all the talent, that's fine, but how good is your locker room? Because there's going to be games where you're down 10 in the fourth, where you have to come together and you have to have that drive. Talent's one thing, but leadership's another.
Yeah, and I can understand what you're saying. Here's where I differ on the Texas A&M situation, and then I'm going to get to Ole Miss. We want to know what you think. Phone lines are going to open at 7:15 a.m. Central. Make sure you hit that subscribe button, hit that like button as well. A&M had a culture problem. They weren't winning before that. Ohio State has won so much, even though they've struggled against Michigan. Go look at their winning percentage. That is a winning tradition and a winning locker room. So you're either going to blend into that, or they've got guys that can replace you. They're that talented. I mean, look what they return on defense. I'm not as worried. I think the Texas A&M comparisons aren't close, right? I really don't. I think the Ole Miss comparisons, I see what you're saying about Quinshon Judkins, and I get that with the Ole Miss, but let's be honest, where Ohio State is and where Ole Miss has been, I know Ole Miss just beat them in a bowl game. Again, that winning culture in that locker room has been kind of formulated through the way they've recruited. A lot of the guys that are their best players are guys that they recruited. So I think it'd be easier to blend in some of these personalities, right, with the locker room that Ohio State has. When it comes to what happens to Ryan Day, I'm kind of caught between a rock and a hard place, because if you do lose to Michigan and you do make the Final Four, let's say, in the first year of the 12-team playoff, I still don't think that's enough. I think if he loses
enough to fire him, or
that's where I'm stuck between the rock and the hard place, because what happens if the Bears job opens with the Eberflus? What happens if there's another big job? Let's say Florida opens or something like that. Is there kind of a mutual parting of the ways between Ryan Day and Ohio State? Not a firing, not a, hey, listen, you've got to get on the raft. We're going to light the torches and push it into the river. But hey, man, this obviously isn't working out at the most important level. You've done a really good job. You have a top 5 winning percentage, but you're not winning the game that matters the most. Is there some mutual parting of the ways, whether that be college or the NFL? Because I just don't. It'd be tough for me to see them firing him, right? But I wouldn't be surprised if it was like, hey, we need some fresh blood in here.
I think whether or not Ryan Day coaches in the NFL, and I think the same thing about Lincoln Riley, whether those two guys end up coaching in the NFL will be totally dictated by their desire to coach in the NFL. Now, it would be a bad loss to lose to Michigan again this year, because you're starting to set up a narrative where, man, we can't even beat Michigan once Jim Harbaugh leaves and they're in a transitory period. If they go 12-2 and lose to Georgia in the semifinal or the national championship, like, they're just not moving off of Ryan Day. You know, it's just going to be a lot of what we've seen the past couple of years, a lot of complaining that they can't get over that hump. But again, look to the north. Look to what Michigan was on the cusp of firing Jim Harbaugh. Should we move off of a guy? And he probably only got his job saved because he played quarterback there, and that was his alma mater. And look, it turned out to be the right thing. So I wouldn't be, too hasty in firing a coach who has a top 5 win percentage. On the NBA or the basketball thing, I love the basketball analogy, because we've seen this at the NBA level and at the college level before. Like, you can't just buy a team by putting the best superstars on. Look at what happened with the Brooklyn Nets. It was an absolute disaster. But with with basketball, you're running 5 guys out on the court, maybe 10 play throughout a game. In football, you're going to run 45 guys out there to play every single Saturday. And the biggest thing for the Buckeyes to me right now is not getting those couple big SEC pieces they added with Caleb Downs and Quinshon Judkins. It's all the guys who decided to return because they lost to Michigan and didn't win the championship.
No, without a doubt, I do think it is a good blend. I do think they have enough of developed talent where, you're not just too heavy on the not prima donnas that come in, but kind of the new faces that have been in the news and that everybody's heard about and everybody's talking about. And they're smart to spend the money. I think this is a very smart play by Ohio State. Sometimes when you're playing poker, you got to push all the chips to the middle. You got to call C.J. Stroud. I need that $50,000. You got to call other guys. We got to make our push now. And look, you got to wait till they fly off the river and see what happens.
First of all, I love a good Texas Hold'em analogy. Thank you. And when you said C.J. Stroud's name, that reminded me of a point that I wanted to make in this segment, which is one thing to keep in mind, the Buckeyes having elite talent has never been the problem, though. That's the thing. So when we talk about, man, they're getting all these good players and they're returning talent.
But they raised that elite talent. They didn't go get that elite talent out of the transfer portal. They brought that through up recruiting. So now you bring that up through recruiting and you add this new piece, this new blend with these new guys, which is the complete different reason on why you've been successful. If there's anything that can put a cog into the machine, it's this. Well, that's the reason I put that A&M comp in there.
Yeah.
There's a reason Ryan Day and Ohio State, before Ryan Day has been all this successful, it is because of culture. But now there's a new culture getting brought into a locker room with a bunch of recruits that you promise a lot of things. So and look, these guys talk and these guys have personalities. So Ohio State's going to be really good, but we're talking about getting them over the hump.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, we got to remember, Texas A&M brought in a bunch of recruits. Like, it wasn't like Texas A&M went to the transfer portal and brought in 40 guys. They signed a bunch of 5-stars. They had the #1 recruiting class in the country. They paid for a bunch of high school kids. Caleb Downs isn't a high school kid. Caleb Downs is coming from Alabama. This man's about business. I'm not worried about Caleb Downs going in that locker room and going with Denzel and all those other guys. He's going to be fine. Will Howard is going to be better than Kyle McCord. He just is. He's an experienced quarterback. I'm not worried about Will Howard going in there and being a prima donna. Quinshon Judkins, we'll see. But guess what? The great part about Ohio State, they got plenty of guys that can run the ball. I'm not worried about guys that can run the ball. But there's a big difference, I think, in bringing in veteran guys that have played in big games that are more mature than signing a 17, 18-year-old kid for this crazy amount of money who's going to college for the first time, and then you got a bunch of them and you promised them they're all going to start. I think those are two totally different things. And if you look at the volume of the amount of players that Texas A&M signed in that vein as opposed to what Ohio State's brought in, to me, it's not even close. And you mix that with the culture. I just think they're in two totally different circumstances. Ohio State just went what, David? 11-2?
Yeah, after the loss to Ole Miss.
Yeah, I mean, these guys have won, and you're just adding a couple really big pieces, really expensive pieces. But look, you want the living room to look nice. I don't know, buy you some nice furniture. Go to one of those expensive-ass furniture stores. YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Thanks for stopping by. Make sure you hit that like button. Turn those notifications on as well. We'd really appreciate it.